Metal screamed under stress before anything else moved. Hydraulic whine shivered through the cockpit of the B-2 as the nose gear rocked against the fractured edge of runway concrete. The cockpit smelled of ozone, burnt dust, and cold jet fuel bled into recirculated air. Beyond the tinted canopy, the night over northern Europe pulsed white with distant impacts, each flash briefly catching the vast black wing stretched around the crew like a shroud. Major Elena Markova's gloved hand hovered over the throttles, not quite touching. Her other hand gripped the yoke so hard her forearm shook inside the G-sleeve. The HUD painted an impossible equation in ghost green. Runway remaining, gross weight, crosswind gusts knifing sideways across the torn strip. Half a runway. Full fuel. Live ordnance. On her left, her co-pilot's boot tapped once against the floor, then went still. She heard him swallow in the intercom. Then the tower's fractured transmission came through, clipped by jamming and panic. Ravenham Tower, inbound salvo, impact. 2 minutes. All aircraft. Static ripped the rest away. Abort meant leaving €1 billion aircraft and its stealth secrets for the enemy to finish on the ground. Attempting takeoff meant hauling more weight than the manuals allowed across a runway that ended in a jagged crater and a field of burning debris. Dumping weapons to lighten the load meant violating the very rules she had spent a decade living by, and possibly killing the villagers whose church bell she could almost hear when the wind dropped. No correct answer, only the one she would have to live with. Her thumb slid, slow and reluctant, toward the master arm guard. A tremor ran through her as another explosion rolled over the base and the nose of the bomber dipped, as if the great wing itself hesitated. "Major," her co-pilot whispered, voice barely more than breath. "Say the word." Elena exhaled once, a thin, controlled stream that fogged her mask. Her eyes traced the luminous edge of the crater at the far end of the runway, then the tiny blinking lights of the village beyond. She chose. The throttles moved. The first thing Elena noticed about Ravenham was how small it felt. From the air, the base had been a neat rectangle of gray concrete pressed into the rolling green of eastern England. On the ground, taxiing in behind the Follow Me truck, the B-2's vast wings seemed to overflow the narrow taxiway, shadow spilling across grass and access roads and the roofs of parked vehicles. Ground crew paused to stare as the black shape drifted past, a silent manta against a low, colorless sky. She sat in the left seat, hands light on the yoke, eyes flicking between centerline engine gauges and the marshaller's tiny gestures. The aircraft's weight vibrated up through the nose gear into the soles of her boots. Every few seconds, she caught her reflection in the HUD glass. Pale eyes, dark, hair tucked under the helmet, the edge of her Slovak flag patch at her shoulder. "Welcome to England," the instructor in the right seat, Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, said over intercom. His tone hovered somewhere between cordial and amused. "Bit tighter than Whiteman, isn't it?" She smiled without turning her head. "The runways at home were smaller," she replied. "This is luxury." He chuckled. "Sure, just don't scrape the wingtips on the hedges. Public relations would be upset." The Follow Me truck peeled off. The B-2 rolled to a stop on a parking spot marked out with what felt, from up here, like child-sized lines. As they ran through shutdown, Elena listened to the engines spool down, the low thunder fading to a deep mechanical sigh. Outside, the world seemed to exhale with them. A cold drizzle began, tiny dots of moisture beating on the canopy and blurring the orange vests moving below. Later, in the squadron briefing room, The air smelled of stale coffee and jet fuel caught in people's flight suits. Maps covered one wall. A digital display showed local time, Zulu time, and the names of crews on the schedule. Elena stood at the back, flight bag at her feet, while Hayes clicked through a set of slides about local procedures. Ravenham's main runway is 3,000 meters, he said, tapping the diagram. For our American visitors, that's just under 10,000 feet. Adequate for the Spirit as long as we behave ourselves. Someone near the front made a quiet, theatrical whistle. Plenty of room for the flying cathedral, another voice muttered. A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Hayes let it roll, then looked toward Elena. Major Markova here is going to prove that European pilots can handle American bulk. She's on her initial check this afternoon. Heads turned. She forced herself to meet a few eyes, nodding once. Sir, one of the younger pilots, Kruger, raised a hand. Are we adjusting our standard departure profile for, continental sensitivities? More chuckles. Elena felt the heat just behind her breastbone and willed her face to stay neutral. Hayes smiled thinly. No. Standard profile, standard speeds. That's the point of standardization, Major Kruger. We don't care which side of the Atlantic your passport came from. The jet needs the same numbers. He advanced to the next slide, but Elena felt the weight of a few eyes lingering, sizing her up, fitting her into some mental file. Exchange pilot, female from a small country. Interesting, but not yet proven. In the pre-flight brief for her check ride, Hayes sat across the table, sleeves rolled, rank insignia slightly scuffed. Here's what I need from you today, he said. Nothing fancy. We're validating that you can integrate into our pattern, understand local ATC, keep to the book. I understand, Elena said. He watched her for a beat too long. I also know you've got over 1,000 hours on type. You've done deployments. You've flown in weather we'd ground for. So let me ask you directly. Are you here to impress me, or are you here to be predictable? The question hung between them. In her mind, she saw the sim profiles she'd flown at Whiteman, the times she'd nudged a rotation early, accepted a slight deviation, earned a wordless nod from an instructor who liked pilots who took ownership. She also saw the thin line on her record. A training incident years ago, when following a senior pilot's aggressive decision, had left a friend injured and her own conscience raw. Predictable, she said finally. For this flight. His mouth twitched. Good answer. Let's see if you believe it at V1. On the runway, the afternoon light lay flat and gray, wind from the west riffling the grass. The B-2 crouched at the threshold, engines humming at idle, nose pointed down the long strip of concrete. Elena could feel the length in her bones. She knew, down to the meter, how much pavement they would roll before the jet's weight yielded to lift. Ravenham Tower, Nightshade 1, ready for departure, runway 09, Hayes transmitted. Nightshade 1, cleared for takeoff, wind 070 at 15, the controller replied, clipped, British, utterly calm. Elena set her heels. Your jet, Hayes said. My jet, she confirmed. Her hand slid the throttles forward to military power, the engine's note rising to a deep, enveloping roar. The acceleration pressed her back. Centerline lights strobed past beneath the nose. Speed numbers built on the HUD. 80 knots. 100. The crosswind tugged faintly at the wing, a gentle insistence. Her mind, unbidden, showed her an alternative. A sharper push on the throttles, a slightly earlier rotation, an assertive correction that would shave distance and send a message. See, I can dance this beast off your narrow little runway. V1, Hayes called. Decision speed. Commit or abort. The muscles in her right hand tensed on the yoke. The aircraft wanted to live. She could feel it, the air thickening around the wing. All it would take was a small, brave pull. She held. Let the numbers climb. Rotate. At the proper speed by the book, she eased the nose up. The jet answered smoothly, as if relieved she wasn't asking for heroics. Ground fell away. Ravenham shrank to a patchwork of concrete and grass and tiny vehicles. They climbed through the low cloud, enveloped in white. Elena kept her scan disciplined, cross-checking instruments, keeping her breathing steady. Nice and boring, Hayes said after a minute. Well done. The words landed flatter than she expected. Hours later, debrief finished. She stood just outside the squadron building, helmet bag in hand. The air was damp, evening settling in. Through an open window, she heard voices. Flew fine, someone was saying. Kruger, she thought. Just very careful, like she's afraid to stretch the wings on that monster. Maybe it's the size. Intimidating, right? Laughter, low and easy. Elena stared out at the dim outline of the B-2 on the ramp, its black wing blending into the dark. Too big, too careful, too foreign. Acceptable, unremarkable. She tightened her grip on the bag until her fingers ached. Never again, she murmured in Slovak, voice barely audible over the wind. The bomber sat motionless in the distance, huge and patient, as if waiting for someone to prove what it could really do. Dawn seeped over Ravenham in a thin pink line, too delicate for the machinery it illuminated. The B-2 sat on its marked apron like an obsidian monolith, dew beating on its back, mist curling under the wide wings. Elena walked toward it with her checklist tucked under one arm, boots crunching on gravel scattered by last night's wind. The air tasted faintly of kerosene, cold metal, and wet grass, a mixture she usually found comforting. Today it felt like a threshold. A few RAF techs lingered near a maintenance truck, hands in pockets, steaming mugs held tight against the morning chill. Their conversation dipped as she approached, then shifted into overly polite nods. No one stepped forward to speak. "Morning, ma'am," one of them offered. His tone held the careful distance of someone addressing a visiting dignitary rather than a fellow aircrew member. "Morning," Elena replied, slowing her pace. "Quiet out here. Always is when the spirit is out," another tech said, gesturing vaguely toward the jet. "People give it space." She followed his gaze. To her eyes, the B-2 looked inert, harmless even, like a creature in hibernation. Yet the emptiness around it, 10 meters of cleared concrete on all sides, gave the impression of a shrine, not an aircraft. "You talk as if it might wake up," she said lightly. None of them laughed. She moved on, inwardly wincing at the invisible wall between them. At other bases she'd flown out of, Italian, Slovak, French. The ground crews had insisted on showing her the quirks of their aprons, swapping stories about jets that refused to start, unless coaxed like stubborn horses. Here, every conversation felt laminated, cautiously formal. At the foot of the access ladder, the British crew chief, Warrant Officer Thomas Renwick, waited with a tablet tucked under one arm. He was tall, wiry, with deep-set eyes that gave nothing away. "Pre-flight panel checks ready, ma'am," he said. "We'll stay outside the red zone unless you request otherwise. Procedures are in place." His voice was clipped, professional, unreadable. Understood. She paused, watching his expression, or rather, the lack of one. "Have you worked on spirits before?" "No, ma'am. Only assisted the Americans with hangar arrangements. We don't handle your codings. We're told not to. He tapped the edge of his tablet. Orders. The distance wasn't personal. It was structural. Rules, politics, prestige. But it felt personal all the same. She climbed the ladder and slid into the left seat, the cockpit cool and shadowed. As she powered up auxiliary systems, the displays glowed to life one by one, like eyes opening. The silence thickened. Down on the ramp, Renwick oversaw his team from a careful distance, ensuring no one crossed into the LO safety bubble. This wasn't sustainable. If war came, and Izzy Moreau's quiet warnings replayed in Elena's mind like a coded message, they would need more than protocol. They would need trust. She leaned out of the cockpit. Warrant Officer Renwick. He stepped forward, stopping precisely at the marked boundary. Ma'am? Bring your tablet, she said. Come up. A flicker, surprise, maybe discomfort, crossed his features. Ma'am, I'm not cleared for contact with... You won't touch anything, she said. Just look. There was a tense beat. The ROE was clear. No unauthorized personnel near the aircraft's skin. But the cockpit wasn't the skin, and she was pilot in command for this pre-flight. Renwick adjusted his gloves, then climbed the ladder with careful, deliberate movements. Inside, he stood with his hands behind his back, scanning the panels as though he'd entered a cathedral. This is what we see, she said quietly, pointing to the environmental controls, the power distribution status, the quiet diagnostics scrolling across the screens. Nothing mystical, just systems, just a jet. He exhaled, a soft huff that wasn't quite a laugh. I'll admit, ma'am, we only ever see its shadow. Didn't expect it to feel so human in here. Something within her eased. It relies on you as much as on us, she said. If things ever get messy, I want to know we can talk straight. No ceremony. Renwick nodded once, and the stiffness in his shoulders softened. Understood. I'll see to it. When he climbed down, the RAF techs watched him with discreet curiosity. Something had shifted, subtly but undeniably. A small bridge built in a place no one expected one. Later, as Elena stepped off the ladder, she saw Hayes across the ramp, arms folded, expression unreadable. He did not call her over, but the slight tilt of his head carried meaning. I saw that. She braced for a reprimand. It didn't come. Instead, he simply turned away, leaving her with the knowledge that he would file the moment somewhere in his private ledger. Walking back to the squadron building, Elena glanced once more at the B-2. The dawn light had strengthened, outlining the aircraft in pale gold. Still vast, still misunderstood, but no longer a ghost. Not entirely. The briefing room lights were dimmed, the projector's glow flattening colors into washed-out blues and grays. On the screen, arrows and symbols crept across a stylized map of Northern Europe. Flight paths, maritime lanes, radar coverage fans reaching over the North Sea like translucent fingers. Elena sat in the second row, arms folded, eyes fixed on the gaps. Those pale wedges where the shaded radar ranges did not quite meet. At this time, the briefer droned, we assess no imminent intent to escalate. Activities remain within the spectrum of routine posturing. His English carried a trace of French vowels, rounded and soft. Nevertheless, we maintain heightened awareness. Flight Lieutenant Isabelle Moreau stood to one side of the screen, hands clasped behind her back, letting the staff officer speak. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe bun. Her gaze flicked between slide and audience with quiet calculation. The staffer clicked to the next slide. A sterile table of dates, aircraft types, Intercept distances. Elena glanced sideways. Izzy's jaw muscle ticked once, then stilled. The gesture was tiny, but Elena had spent her career reading small movements in turbulent cockpits. Something in this brief was incomplete. Questions dribbled in at the end, none of them piercing. Clarifications about altitudes, communications procedures, generic queries. When it was over, chairs scraped, people stood, conversations restarted in low hums. Elena remained seated until the crowd thinned, then rose and moved toward Izzy. "Flight Lieutenant Moreau," she said. "Good brief." Izzy's mouth quirked. "It was not my brief," she replied. "I just supplied the pretty pictures." "The pretty pictures had holes," Elena said. "In coverage. West of the Norwegian sector, north of here." Izzy's gaze sharpened. "Our radars do not curve with the Earth as much as we might like," she said lightly. "Physics is uncooperative." "And the adversary's aircraft only fly where we can see them?" Elena asked. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The murmur of other crews flowed around them. Izzy's eyes, a cool hazel, assessed Elena as if deciding whether she could be trusted with something fragile. "You are a pilot, Major," Izzy said finally. "Your ROE is clear. You fly based on validated tasking, not on rumors or analysts' nightmares." Her tone was mild, but there was an edge beneath it. "You start chasing shadows, you will spook yourself, and others." Elena felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the sense of being told just enough to stay obedient, not enough to be honest with herself. "Shadows can still hit the runway," she said. "If I'm in the jet when that happens, I would like to have context." Izzy glanced at the clock on the wall. "I have another brief in 10 minutes. The sensible move would be to nod, walk away, accept the official line. Keep the relationship clean, professional. Pilots were not supposed to fish for off-record intel. That way lay unofficial channels and compromises. Instead, Elena heard herself say, "Do you drink coffee that isn't brewed in a steel urn? There's a place in the village, 3 minutes outside the gate. This evening." Izzy's brows rose. "Is this an invitation or an interrogation, Major?" "Both," Elena said, before she could soften it. "I'd prefer it be friendly." Another beat of assessment. Then Izzy shrugged, the movement small and elegant. 1800 by the main gate," she said. "I will bring my own ghosts." The cafe in the village smelled of roasted beans and baking bread. Wooden chairs, mismatched, scraped softly on old floorboards. Through the front window, the road curved past stone houses and a tiny church, its steeple just visible above the roofs. Elena sat at a corner table out of sight from the street, but with a clear view of the door. She had worn civilian clothes that still managed to look like uniform. Dark jeans, a plain sweater, boots too practical to be local fashion. The place was half full of villagers, some in work jackets, some in school uniforms. A few glanced at her, recognizing the base haircut, the posture. Izzy arrived 5 minutes late, in a navy coat and scarf, hair loosened slightly. She looked briefly younger, and then the expression in her eyes restored the weight. "You chose well," she said, hanging her coat over the back of the chair. "Their espresso is almost not an insult." They ordered. Small talk filled the first minutes. Weather, the village bakery, the quality of English roads. Elena watched the level of Izzy's guard as carefully as she watched her own. Finally, Izzy set her cup down with deliberate care. "You are not here for coffee," she said. "Not entirely. Ask your question." Elena considered the words she was not supposed to say. "How bad is it?" she asked. In your assessment, not in the slides. Izzy leaned back, looking up at the ceiling for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was lower. The crisp briefing room cadence softened. They are rehearsing routes that exploit the seams in our radar coverage, she said. They are timing response delays. They are flying heavier profiles than before. And certain units are no longer returning to their peacetime bases after exercises. Prepositioning, Elena said. Izzy nodded. I am not supposed to use that word outside certain rooms. Then why meet me? Elena asked. Because you will be one of the first people we ask to fly when the politicians finally admit what is already true, Izzy said. And I prefer my pilots to be awake. The words should have reassured her. Instead, a different anxiety stirred. If I know more than I am officially briefed, Elena said slowly, I risk seeing threats where my orders say there are none. My ROE doesn't change because of what you tell me here. Izzy's gaze held hers. That is your dilemma, she agreed. Do you want the comfort of ignorance or the discomfort of knowing how blind we are? Either way, you will still line up on the runway when told. Elena thought of the map, the pale wedges where coverage faded, of Ravenham's long, apparently generous runway, and how small it had felt under the B-2's wings, of Renwick's careful distance, Hayes's watchful eyes. I don't like surprises, she said. Then you chose the wrong profession, Izzy replied, but there was no mockery in it. Outside, a church bell rang the hour. Conversations in the cafe rose and fell. For a moment, everything felt still. You're right, Elena said quietly. I will still fly what I am told, but I would rather be uneasy and prepared than calm and blind. Izzy's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Good, she said. Then I will show you something next time. Not today. Next time, Elena repeated. On the walk back to the base, the air had turned sharper, the sky a hard, clear blue. Elena looked up, tracing in her mind the invisible arcs of radar beams, the paths aircraft might take to slip between them. Shadows, she thought, did not care whether she had been officially warned. They only cared whether she was ready when they arrived. The simulator bay sat at the far end of a converted hangar, a darkened cavern humming with air conditioning and electronics. Inside the dome, the world narrowed to the phosphor glow of the displays and the subtle, artificial sway of motion cues. It smelled faintly of plastic and stale breath, a poor substitute for jet fuel and cold dawn. But this was where Ravenham judged your mind, not your stomach. Elena sat in the left seat of the B-2 simulator, fingers resting lightly on the throttles. The wraparound visuals showed Ravenham's runway under a steel-gray sky, rain streaking across the virtual canopy. Crosswind vectors glowed discreetly on the HUD. Okay, Major, the sim chief's voice crackled from the instructor station behind them. Squadron Leader Patel sounded almost cheerful. Standard departure, local procedures. We'll throw in a few surprises after you're airborne. Don't worry, nothing you can't handle. In the right seat, Kruger smirked. They only do that when they trust the jet can actually get off the ground, he murmured on the intercom. 3,000 meters. Luxury for this creature. His gloved hand patted the console as if the virtual bomber could feel the insult. Elena kept her gaze forward. Nightshade 1 ready for departure, she said, voice steady. They advanced the throttles. Engine noise deepened, the simulated aircraft surging forward. Rain-speckled runway lights blurred into streaks. Numbers climbed. 80, 100, 120. Wind's picking up, Kruger observed. Bit of sport. Then the runway ahead seemed to jump closer. For a heartbeat, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. Then the distance-to-go markers on the HUD flickered, recalibrated, and suddenly the far threshold looked nearer. Patel's voice came, too casual. "Minor construction at the far end today, folks. Reduced runway length. Keep it standard." Her pulse spiked. "Construction was not in the brief," she said. "In real life, it won't be," Patel replied. "ROE remains. Follow your published departure. Let's see your decision-making at V1. The B-2 hurtled forward. The HUD numbers kept climbing, but the runway end rushed at them faster than the maths in her head liked. Crosswind tugged at the wing, pushing them infinitesimally off-center. "V1, Kruger called. "Decision. Commit or abort." By the manual, with this new length, the safe choice was to reject. To bring the throttles to idle, deploy brakes, accept the weight of failure and the write-up that would follow. She thought in a flash of alternate profiles discussed late at night at Whiteman. Unapproved schemes to coax heavy bombers off marginal strips. Higher power early, slightly lower rotation speed. Living on the knife edge of stall. "Rotate," Kruger said. Her hand tightened. If she pulled now, if it worked, Kruger would see. The sim chief would see. The story would spread. The foreigner who threw the cathedral into the sky off a postage stamp. But the ROE was explicit. Training departures by the book. No experimental techniques. She forced herself to feel the imagined weight of a real aircraft, real lives, real concrete. She saw, unbidden, the look in her father's eyes when he'd spoken of pilots who cut corners for glory. "Abort!" she snapped. Throttles to idle, air brakes out. The cockpit shuddered as the brakes bit. The runway end swelled in the windscreen, but the speed bled away. They lurched to a halt with meters to spare, the nose dipping. Silence filled the sim. "Textbook rejected takeoff," Patel said. "No heroics. Well done, Major." Kruger made a small, disdainful noise. "We'd be stuck on the ground, jet intact, runway out of action, mission scrubbed. Congratulations." "Better than a crater full of composite," she replied, unstrapping. The debrief was clinical. Patel praised her adherence to procedure, her calm. Kruger's comments were more subdued, his sarcasm sharpened by frustration. On paper, it was a pass. Yet as Elena walked back through the hangar's echoing space, something gnawed at her. The scenario had been contrived, yes, but the feeling of the runway rushing up had been too real. The bomber had felt heavier than the numbers on the screen. That night, long after most lights in the squadron building had gone out, she badged herself back into the simulator bay. The security officer at the desk glanced up, registered her rank and name, and said nothing beyond, "Log your session, ma'am." Inside the dome, the world could be anything she asked it to be. She keyed in the earlier scenario, then adjusted the parameters. Crosswind a knot higher, rain a little heavier. Same reduced runway. Same gross weight. In the login field, she entered her credentials, noting the automatic timestamp. Alone in the cockpit glow, she settled into the left seat, heart already beating faster. This time there was no Kruger, no Patel, no formal ROE hovering over the intercom. There was only the question that had been chewing at her since the debrief. Is it actually possible? Nightshade 1 cleared for takeoff, the simulated tower said. She pushed the throttles forward harder, earlier. The acceleration came with a slightly more urgent shove. She rode the center line, compensating for the crosswind with minute pressures on the pedals. V1 ticked past. She didn't call it aloud. She watched the runway end hurtling closer, felt her body braced. At a speed just under the manual's rotation call, She eased back on the yoke. The jet hesitated. She could almost hear it thinking. Then the nose lifted. Gear shudder. The runway blurred beneath. For a heartbeat, they hung in the uncomfortable limbo of ground effect, neither fully flying nor tied to the earth. Her gut clenched. "Come on," she whispered. The virtual airfield fell away, grudgingly. The climb rate barely registered positive. Any gust, any sudden sink, and they would have eaten concrete and shame. But the numbers crawled upward. The bomber lived. She held the climb until the gear-up speed, then retracted, breathing only when the simulated altimeter showed a few hundred feet. It had worked. Barely. All her instincts told her the margin had been thinner than the pixels on the screen. She ended the scenario, fingers suddenly clumsy. Logs saved automatically, time, profile, parameters, proof of what she had done, as undeniable as a radar trace. As she stepped out of the simulator dome, the base seemed larger, emptier. The aggressive profile buzzed in her muscles, a ghost sensation of lift and drag and risk. On the way out, she saw a figure in the corridor. Hayes, in flight suit and fleece, coffee mug in hand. He looked surprised to see her, then glanced at the simulator status screen above the doorway, where her recent session still glowed. "Burning midnight oil, Major?" he asked. She opened her mouth, then shut it. There was no rule against extra sim time, but there were rules about what you did with it. "Just exploring the limits of standard procedures, sir," she said. His eyes flicked to the status panel again, taking in the reduced runway scenario. One brow rose by a barely perceptible increment. "I'll be interested in your conclusions," he said quietly. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. As Elena stepped out into the cold night air, she realized that the line she had crossed wasn't in the simulator. It was inside her, between what she would do in training and what she might one day choose when the runway wasn't made of pixels. Bratislava in early winter smelled of chimney smoke and river fog, the Danube rolling slow and dark beneath a low sky. Elena climbed the steps to her father's apartment block, with a knot forming beneath her ribs. Every visit began with the hope that this time they would speak plainly, and every visit ended with the heavy silence of two pilots separated by different centuries. He opened the door before she knocked. Colonel Retino. Victor Marco still stood like a man bracing for G-forces, shoulders square, spine straight, white hair cropped short. His eyes flicked over her overnight bag, her civilian coat, the faint lines of fatigue around her mouth. "You look tired," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "I hear Americans fly at night even when there is no need." "It was training," she replied, shrugging out of her coat. "Sim evaluations." He closed the door with a little more force than necessary. "Simulators. In my day, a pilot flew through real wind." She let the jab pass. His apartment was unchanged. MiG-23 photographs framed in proud rows, the cracked leather jacket on its peg, the faint smell of engine oil that clung to old flight logs and memories. They sat at the kitchen table. He poured tea. Neither touched it. "You like it there?" he asked abruptly. "England?" "It's good flying," she said. "The crews are professional. And you carry American weapons for American goals." She inhaled slowly. "I carry NATO weapons for NATO goals. Slovakia is part of NATO." He gave a short, sharp laugh. "You say that like it changes the physics. A B-2, Elena? That is not a pilot's airplane. That is a politician's hammer. You press a button from a safe distance and pretend you are brave." She met his gaze. It hurt more than she would ever admit. "You flew low-level routes over the Tatras at night. Different war, different threats. Different courage, he said, lifting his cup. We risked ourselves, not villages 1,000 kilometers away. She felt her jaw tighten. And how many of your comrades died in training because they flew low enough to kiss trees? You talk about honor as if it feeds widows. His cup paused mid-air. His eyes narrowed, more in wounded recognition than anger. Elena forced her voice softer. Papa, your era was maneuver, terrain masking, cannon and blood. Mine is different. We avoid civilians by staying unseen. We deter. We make them hesitate before they launch anything. That is not cowardice. Deterrence, he muttered. A polite word for hiding. Hiding? She shook her head. No. Surviving. Giving politicians time to de-escalate. Believe me, nothing about carrying weapons you pray you never release feels like hiding. He looked away, out the window at the gray river. Your mother believed in such things. I never did. She swallowed. I'm not asking you to be proud. Just don't call what I do dishonorable. Silence hung, fragile as frost. Finally, he set the cup down. If your job keeps soldiers alive, ours and theirs, then perhaps it is not the worst kind of service. His tone made the concession sound like defeat. But do not expect me to admire a machine that kills without showing its face. Then admire the pilot who flies it, she said gently. His eyes softened, barely. We will see. She left the next morning. They did not hug. They never had been that kind of family. But as she wheeled her bag toward the stairwell, he called her name. Elena. She turned. He held something small in his hand. Black leather worn smooth at the knuckles. His old MiG flight gloves. For luck, he said gruffly, flicking them toward her. I will not need them again. She caught them instinctively. The leather felt warm, impossibly light. Jaquim, she whispered. He shut the door before she could say more. Ravenham greeted her with sleet and a tightening mood. The base felt suspended. Crews walking faster, conversations clipped, the rattle of generators under a heavy sky. She hung her coat in her quarters and placed the gloves on her desk, fingers curled as if gripping a stick. On her way to the squadron building, she glimpsed Izzy striding across the operations yard, tablet pressed to her chest. The intelligence officer looked sharper than usual, movements brisk, almost urgent. Elena quickened her steps. Something happened? Izzy nodded once. Border clash in the north. Small but serious. Political denials already flying. She studied Elena's face, then added softly, I hope your leave was peaceful. Elena touched the gloves inside her pocket, feeling the imprint of her father's past. Peaceful enough? Izzy's gaze lingered, as if she sensed more but knew not to dig. Briefing in 20 minutes, she said. Come prepared. Elena exhaled into the frigid air. Old wars, new rules, none of it simple, all of it converging faster than expected. She headed for the squadron building, the leather gloves warm against her palm, a reminder that even when the world changed shape, its ghosts traveled with you. The order came in the form of a color change. On the squadron status board, the strip above Ravenham Air Base flicked from amber to a deeper red, a shade that seemed to darken the whole corridor. Below it, small bulbs lit up beside crew names, bathing the list in a low, insistent glow. Bomber alert posture, Hayes announced in the ready room that afternoon. His voice was level, but the way he rolled his shoulders betrayed a familiar tension. Effective immediately, Nightshade crews will bed down in proximity to the jets. New launch timeline is 15 minutes from klaxon to wheels rolling. A murmur swept the room. Flight bags shifted. Someone's pen clicked too fast, too often. Elena sat forward, elbows on her knees, listening. The border clash Izzy had mentioned had not gone away. It had metastasized into skirmishes, leaks, denials. Now the posture caught up. At this time, Hayes went on, we are not at war. We are signaling readiness. That's all. He let the last two words hang, knowing they were a lie in every heart that heard them. Kruger raised a hand, leaning back in his chair with the easy slouch of someone who pretended not to care. Sir, are we talking fully loaded birds or just show the flag taxi drills? Fully loaded, Hayes said. Weapons will be live but safed. ROE remains unchanged. No release without authenticated codes through proper channels. You're not cowboys. Someone muttered, shame, and the room chuckled uneasily. Elena glanced around. She saw three kinds of faces, those gone pale, eyes too wide, those with brittle smiles and sharpened jokes, and a narrow band in between, forced into stillness. After the brief, she gathered her own crew in a smaller annex, a cramped space with a whiteboard, a coffee machine, and a lingering smell of instant noodles. Her co-pilot, Captain Miller, perched on the edge of the table, restless foot tapping. The mission-led navigator leaned against the wall, arms folded tightly. The electronic warfare officer toyed with a pen, spinning it, dropping it, picking it up again. So, Miller said, breaking the silence. Doomsday Hotel it is. I snore, by the way. Apologies in advance. Nervous laughter scratched around the room. Elena slid her father's gloves into her flight suit pocket, grounding herself with the feel of worn leather. We're not at Doomsday, she said. We're at the politicians have finally noticed the laws of physics. The EWO snorted. Comforting. She weighed her next words. The safe route was bland reassurance. Training as usual, nothing to see, trust the system. The honest route risked feeding the fear already nibbling at the edges. She thought of Izzy's careful tone, the unspoken word, prepositioning, of radar gaps and misaligned coverage, of Renwick's newly softened shoulders on the ramp. You deserve more than slogans, she said. So here is what I can tell you without breaking any rules. Their eyes found her, grateful and wary. On the other side, she went on, they're moving pieces into place that only make sense if they're considering using them. That does not guarantee they will, but it means someone in their chain of command thinks it is worth planning for. Our alert posture is our way of saying, if you step over a line, you will be met, precisely, quickly, and with as little collateral damage as possible. The navigator exhaled slowly. So we are not doomed, he said. We are insurance. We are a reason for them to think twice, Elena said. And we are professionals. That is our job, to be ready and calm when someone else finally loses theirs. Miller's foot stopped tapping. You're saying this could actually matter, he said. Not just exercise nonsense. Yes, she said. It could. That's why it's important we treat alert like what it is. Serious, but not a funeral. We sleep in our suits so that if the bell rings, we're not scrambling like new cadets. We keep routines. We eat, we joke, we check each other. The EWO nodded, tension easing from his shoulders. I'll take needed over screwed, he said. Good, Elena replied. Then we start by checking our go bags again. No heroics, no talismans. Just what you need to function for 24 hours if we launch and divert somewhere unfriendly. As they reviewed lists, extra batteries, laminated checklists, a photograph or two tucked between forms, she felt the room's energy shift from free-floating fear to something denser, more focused. They were still afraid. Only fools wouldn't be. But the fear now had a job. Later, in the alert quarters adjacent to the hangar, the air was thick with shared breath and whispered conversations. Rows of camp beds lined the low room, flight suits hanging from hooks, boots lined up neatly underneath. A single television played muted news, subtitles looping beneath footage of distant protests and carefully worded press conferences. Kruger sprawled on his bunk, hands folded behind his head, talking to a small knot of pilots who had gathered near the door. "Look at us," he said lightly. "Parked next to our flying cathedrals like candles waiting to be lit. Politicians wave some codes. We go burn the world, then come back for medals and nightmares." A few of the younger officers gave uncertain smiles. Elena, passing by, paused. "If you really believed that," she said quietly, "you wouldn't be here." He met her eyes, expression flattening. "Or I would be here precisely because I don't trust anyone else to be." The room held its breath. She regarded him for a moment, then nodded once. "Then we agree on at least one thing," she said, and moved on. Sleep came in ragged fragments. She dozed in her bunk, boots half-laced, flight suit unzipped to the chest. Around her, bodies shifted. Someone snored. Someone whispered a prayer in a language she didn't recognize. The lights were dimmed, but never off. At some indeterminate hour, late, early, time blurred, the klaxon erupted. A harsh, metallic howl tore through the room, vibrating in her chest before her brain caught up. Red lights strobed along the ceiling, bathing faces in urgent color. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. For an instant she lay frozen, mind divided cleanly between two possibilities: drill or war. "Move!" she heard herself shout, already swinging her legs off the bunk. Leather gloves thumped against her chest inside the pocket, as if her father's hand had reached across years to shove her toward the door. Outside, in the corridor, footsteps pounded, orders barked, the air thick with adrenaline, and the undeniable sense that the line between exercise and reality had thinned to near transparency. The klaxon still echoed in her bones when Elena's boots hit the hangar floor. Cold air knifed in through the open doors, carrying the tang of jet exhaust and the metallic clatter of hurried tools. Floodlights bathed the B-2 in harsh white, flattening its curves into a stark silhouette. Ground crew sprinted across the apron, headsets askew, marshalling wands already glowing. "Let's go," Elena snapped, and her crew fell into a practiced line behind her. Miller, the navigator, the EWO, zipping, buckling, grabbing helmets on the run. The loudspeakers blared, "All Nightshade crews to assigned aircraft. Launch sequence Alpha. This is not a drill." The last phrase crackled with static, as if uncertain of itself. Not a drill. Her pulse spiked. Inside the cockpit, her hands knew the sequence before her mind did. Battery on, APU start, displays blooming like a night city. The world outside shrank to the wraparound glass and the tight choreography of checklists. "Ground, Nightshade 1, she called over intercom. "Request pushback and taxi clearance as soon as we've got engines." The ground controller's voice came back higher than usual. "Nightshade 1, roger. Stand by. We've got multiple movements. Stand by." Miller shot her a look. He'd heard it too. The slight tremor under the words. Engines spooled. Vibrations ran through the airframe into her seat, the comforting growl of mass coming to life. She glanced at the clock. 4 minutes since klaxon. Not bad. Not brilliant. "Nightshade 1, taxi to runway 09 via Alpha 2. Hold short at Alpha 4, ground finally transmitted. Expedite traffic behind you." Copy taxi via Alpha 2, hold short Alpha 4, Elena replied. Expedite. They rolled out of the hangar's shadow into a chaos of motion. Another B-2, Nightshade 2, crept from its bay ahead on a parallel taxi lane, wingtips lurking close to the perimeter fence. Farther down, the rotating beacons of tankers and fighters flashed like a staggered constellation. Jesus, the EWO muttered. Everyone's awake. The radio crackled again, more rushed this time. Nightshade 2, Nightshade 1, tower, correction ground, cleared to taxi in sequence to runway 09 via Alpha 2 and Alpha 4. Give way to Nightshade 3 at intersection Charlie. Elena frowned. Ground, say again? Nightshade 1 is already on Alpha 2. Affirm, just follow Nightshade 2, give way to Nightshade 3 at Charlie. We're, combining strips. Stand by. Combined strips. She pictured the ground controller's console cluttered with paper flight, progress strips, hands grabbing at the wrong ones in haste. Up ahead, Nightshade 2 seemed unsure, brakes feathering, nose weaving slightly. To their right, beyond the dark shapes of hangars, wingtip strobes marked the movement of another heavy rolling toward the same intersection. This is messy, Miller said quietly. We're big. They're big. Runway is not. RO ran through her head like a checklist of its own. Comply with ATC unless safety is compromised. Trust the system. Don't freeload your own interpretations. Ground, confirm Nightshade 1 to give way to Nightshade 3 at Charlie, she requested, forcing her voice calm. Affirm, Nightshade 1. Give way at Charlie. Taxi, we're up against the clock. The way he said it, pushing tempo, made something tighten in her gut. On the taxi map, the symbols converged in her mind. 3 heavies, 2 routes, 1 choke point. And under all of it, the knowledge Izzy had slipped her in quiet moments, how the base's layout offered little redundancy. Ahead, Nightshade 2 rolled past a painted hold line without hesitating. They're going straight through, Miller said. They think they're first. Elena's hand hovered over the tiller. She could continue, trusting that ground had a picture she lacked. Or she could stop, break the sequence, and risk sowing more confusion in an already overloaded tower. Her father's voice surfaced from memory. In doubt, save the metal. Save the people inside it. Brakes, she ordered. Nightshade 1 stopping. Miller blinked, then nodded, hands moving to support. Ground, Nightshade 1, she transmitted, cutting across a burst of overlapping calls. Holding position at Alpha 2. Negative taxi until you confirm Nightshade 3's location. We do not have visual, and we're not driving blind into a 3-heavy merge. There was a beat of stunned silence, like the base taking a breath. Nightshade 1, ground, hold position, the controller said, voice suddenly sharper. Paper rustled in the background. Another voice murmured, All Nightshade aircraft, stop taxi. Repeat, stop taxi. The ramp seemed to freeze. Taxi lights halted, engines still grumbling, but the motion arrested. Radar. Where the hell is 3? Someone muttered on a background frequency Elena wasn't supposed to hear. He's at Charlie already. No, that's a tanker. Wait. Elena stared ahead, jaw clenched. If this turned out to be a simple miscommunication, she'd painted herself as insubordinate at the worst possible time. Then a new voice cut in, calmer, with the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed. This is Tower Supervisor. All Nightshade aircraft. Maintain current positions. Ground, we will resequence. Nightshade 3, hold at Bravo. Nightshade 2, continue to Charlie. Nightshade 1, you'll follow when clear. In the right seat, Miller let out a slow breath. Nice catch. She didn't feel victorious, only cold. 10 minutes later, the drill was called off. The loudspeakers announced it as a procedural evaluation exercise. Engines wound down, taxi lights winked out. Crews trudged back to quarters, adrenaline ebbing into exhausted grumbling. In the debrief room, Hayes stood at the front, arms folded. His face was taut, the lines around his eyes deeper. First, he said, nobody hit anything. Nobody died. That's the good news. The bad news is, our ground movement looked like amateur hour. A few people shifted in their seats. He turned to Elena. Major Markova, you halted Nightshade 1 against ATC instructions. The room's attention snapped to her. Elena met Hayes's gaze, spine straight. Sir, ATC instructions were conflicting, and we lacked positive visual on Nightshade 3. Continuing would have meant taxiing 150 tons of bomber into a blind merge. I judged safety compromised. Hayes held her eyes for a long second. Then he nodded once. Correct. When ATC is overwhelmed, aircraft commanders keep the metal safe. That doesn't mean you get to ignore them because you don't like the plan. It means you step in when they've lost the plot. Today, ground lost the plot. A ripple of relieved exhalation passed through the room. However, he added, the call should not have been necessary. We will fix that. And we will remember that in a real launch, the enemy doesn't care if we taxi prettily. After the debrief, he caught up with her in the corridor. Good instincts, he said quietly. You prevented what could have been an ugly incident. Thank you, sir. He sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. Just remember something, Major. The people whose careers depend on this base looking competent will not thank you for making their control room recordings sound like a circus. Safety matters. So does politics. You picked the right side today. Tomorrow might be trickier. She nodded, a small, grim acknowledgement. Understood. Later, in the intel cell, Izzy pulled up a satellite image on her screen. A bird's-eye view of Ravenham, its single long runway, its cramped taxiways. From above, she said, your home looks very vulnerable. One good strike here, here, and here. She tapped 3 points: threshold, midpoint, taxi choke. And all those big wings have nowhere to go. Elena stared at the image, remembering the feeling of frozen motion on the ramp, the staccato panic in Ground's voice. We just practiced failing slowly, she said. Izzy glanced at her. And you practiced refusing to cooperate with failure, she replied. Remember that. You may need it when it's not a drill. The engineer's office overlooked the runway through a pane of glass that had seen better cleaning days. Fine dust streaked the view, softening the line where concrete met sky. From here, the strip looked long and serene, a gray river cutting through green fields. Major Elena Markova stood with her hands clasped behind her back, while Squadron Leader Patel, moonlighting as base infrastructure liaison, paginated through a stack of diagrams on his desk. You're not the first pilot to notice we only have one proper runway, he said, flipping to a cross-section. It's Europe, not Kansas. Space is expensive. I'm not asking for a second one, Elena replied. I'm asking what happens if that one is broken. He tapped the page with a biro. We have rapid runway repair kits, precast slabs, expedient fill material, engineers on rotation from the Royal Engineers, a NATO civil assist team on call. In a contingency, we plug the holes, paint some new lines, and off you go. Assuming they miss the same spots our planners expect them to hit, she said. Patel sighed, leaning back. Major, This isn't my first airbase. Everyone worries about the unthinkable. The unthinkable rarely happens exactly the way you rehearse it. That's why we don't fetishize specific scenarios. She moved closer to the glass, eyes tracing the runway's length. Even from here, she could see slight discolorations, old repairs, resurfaced patches. Do our rapid repair kits assume a clean apron? Or do they assume burning fuel, secondary explosions, and crater lips full of twisted rebar? He raised a hand in mock surrender. You're lugging around an impressive amount of worst case in that head of yours. Someone has to, she said. You saw the taxi chaos during the exercise. That was without any holes in the concrete. He grimaced. Touché. Look, we do tabletop exercises. We run war games. Your job is to fly. Ours is to make sure there's something to fly from. Trust the division of labor. Trust. The word sat uneasily. Trust had not been what she'd felt listening to ground panic under pressure. Outside, a pair of typhoons rolled toward the holding point, lean and eager. Beyond them, the runway stretched further than any Slovak airfield she had grown up around. Yet all her instincts screamed that length could turn to nothing in minutes. As she left the engineer's office, she nearly collided with Kruger in the corridor. He carried a sheaf of printouts, helmet bag slung casually over one shoulder. Markova, he said. Heard you've decided to save the base from substandard asphalt. She stepped aside. Just asking how many holes we can afford before we're decorating the grass. He smirked. You planning to fix them yourself? Pick up a shovel between sorties? If it keeps us from rolling into a crater, maybe, she said. He laughed, the sound a little too loud. Careful. Keep this up and they'll put you in charge of drainage. Less glamorous than riding the cathedral. He moved on, whistling. She watched him go, irritation prickling under her skin. It would be easy to dismiss her own concern as paranoia, to drown it in sarcasm until it felt petty. Instead, she went to her desk. The memo began clinically. Subject: Training considerations for reduced-length operations at Ravenham AB. She cited doctrine, NATO rapid runway repair manuals, case studies from other theaters, bullet points about debris hazards and alternate taxi patterns. She was careful with the verbs. Not we must, but it may be beneficial. Not likely attack vector, but potential vulnerability. The language of officers who wanted to be taken seriously without sounding like prophets of doom. In the second half, she threaded in what she really wanted. Authorization to explore, in simulators and limited ground drills, procedures for B-2 operations from shortened runway segments, threshold shifts, altered rotation points, modified abort criteria. All framed as academic curiosity, a desire to enhance flexibility in unforeseen contingencies. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the page. She read it twice, trimming anything that smelled like panic. Then she hit send, routing it to Hayes in the ops planning cell. An hour later, he appeared at her cubicle, memo in hand. Ambitious reading material for a Tuesday, he said. She looked up, meeting his gaze evenly. We're going to alert status on a single strip of concrete that sits well within missile range. I'd like to know we've thought beyond we'll fix it when it breaks. He tapped the paper. You're not wrong. You're also treading close to other people's rice bowls. Engineers don't love pilots telling them their business. Neither do airfield planners. Then frame it as curiosity, not criticism, she said. If we never need it, we've lost nothing but some simulator hours. If we do... He studied her, expression opaque. Then he sighed. All right. I'll forward it up the chain. No promises. Don't expect a parade. I don't like parades, she said. As he walked away, Izzy leaned in from the neighboring doorway, a file held like a shield. "You just wrote your own future," she murmured. Elena frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Izzy said. "If something happens to that runway, every eye will turn to whoever mentioned it in a memo. And if nothing happens, they will remember the woman who bothered them with unpleasant questions." She smiled without humor. "Either way, you will not be anonymous." Weeks slipped by. The political situation worsened in fits and starts. A skirmish here, a sanction there. Ravenham's tempo increased. Alert became the new normal, its strangeness worn smooth by repetition. On a raw, windy afternoon, Elena stood near the perimeter fence, watching a construction crew idle beside a half-finished taxiway expansion. Machinery sat still, orange netting flapping. No workers moved. Renwick came up beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. "They've paused the project," he said. "Funding shifted. Priorities changed." "To what?" she asked. He shrugged. "Other bases, other lines on some spreadsheet." She looked from the abandoned construction to the single, pristine runway, its concrete unblemished, under a heavy, lowering sky. For a moment she saw it superimposed with Izzy's satellite image, craters blooming along its length like open mouths. A cold weight settled behind her sternum. "Cracks," she murmured. Renwick glanced at her. "What?" "Nothing," she said. "Just thinking how much faith we put in straight lines." She turned back toward the squadron building, the wind clawing at her sleeves. Somewhere in the inboxes of men and women she would never meet, her memo sat as a few kilobytes of text, read, skimmed, or ignored. The concrete beneath her boots felt solid. That was the problem. The sound woke her before the sirens. A low, distant thunder rolled through the alert quarters, not the familiar rumble of engines, but a deeper concussion that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The bunk shook. A second later, a flash of white light bled around the edges of the blackout curtains. Then the klaxon screamed. Elena was already moving. Boots hit the floor, hands dragging her zipper up, helmet under her arm before conscious thought fully surfaced. Around her, other bodies jerked into motion, Miller cursing in his sleep-rough voice, the navigator fumbling with his leg harness. "Up!" she snapped. "This is not a drill!" The air tasted of dust and fear. As they burst into the corridor, another impact rolled through the base. Closer, sharper, rattling light fixtures, sending a fine rain of plaster down. Emergency lighting strobed red along the ceiling, turning faces into grotesque masks. A voice over the loudspeaker tried to speak, dissolved into static, then returned, higher and strained. "Base under missile attack. All alert crews proceed to aircraft. Repeat, all alert crews." The rest was drowned by another detonation, this one punching the breath from her lungs like a physical blow. Somewhere outside, glass shattered in a cascading roar. They ran. Outside the building, the morning sky over Ravenham had turned a sickly orange. Ballistic missiles arced down in luminous trails beyond the perimeter, blossoms of fire beating at the horizon. A hangar near the far end of the flight line already burned, black smoke boiling upward, carrying flecks of insulation that fluttered like ash. Elena sprinted, helmet bouncing against her hip, the cold air knifing her throat. The ground shuddered again as a warhead slammed into the far side of the base, the shockwave hitting a heartbeat later, an invisible wall that staggered them mid-stride. "Keep moving!" she shouted, though no one had slowed willingly. They rounded the corner toward the main access road to the ramp and, almost collided with chaos. A fuel truck lay on its side in the middle of the tarmac, windows blown out, tank cracked, but miraculously not yet burning. Nearby, a young airman in a reflective vest sprawled half on the road, half on the grass, one leg twisted at a wrong angle, blood seeping through the fabric at his thigh. His eyes were wide, stunned, fixed on the sky. Elena's body reacted before her brain. She dropped to her knees, fingers going to his carotid. Pulse, fast, thready. He tried to speak. Only a wet, bubbling sound emerged. "Ma'am," Miller panted behind her. "We have to—" Another explosion crashed somewhere toward the runway. The concussion slapped her eardrums, turned the air to water. Alarms wailed in overlapping pitches. Fire, security, who knew? Duty warred inside her, the order echoing from the speakers. Get to the jet, launch if able, and the immediate reality of the boy's blood on her gloves. She shoved her shoulder under his and hauled, muscles screaming as she dragged him toward the concrete step of a nearby doorway that offered at least some cover. His gasp was a knife in her gut. "Stay with me," she said, not sure if he could hear over the roaring in her own head. "Medics will come. You stay low and you stay angry, understand?" His hand clawed at her sleeve, then slid away, fingers slick. "Major," Miller said, voice tight. "We're losing time." She looked at the airman, still breathing, barely, and at her crew, faces pinched, eyes flicking between her and the distant silhouette of the B-2. The bomber sat on its spot like a black wound against the smoke, engines cold, vulnerable. Another missile trail streaked downward in the distance. If they didn't get it airborne, it would die on the ground with everything it carried. Elena forced her hands to release the boy's flight vest. She pressed him flat against the wall, as shielded as she could make him. "Medics!" she bellowed toward a pair of firefighters sprinting past with a stretcher. She jerked her chin toward the doorway. "Wounded here! Arterial!" One of them veered, eyes widening when he saw the leg. "We've got him!" he shouted. It wasn't a promise. It was the closest thing she would get. She turned away, throat raw, and ran. By the time they reached the B-2, the base had descended into a surreal nightmare. Secondary explosions rippled along a line of fuel bladders near the far fence. A chunk of concrete the size of a truck lay speared into the grass. The main runway, visible between hangars, was scarred. Dark smears, a jagged tear where a warhead had found its mark near the far threshold. The B-2 itself had taken shrapnel, chips along the leading edge, scorch marks on the tarmac, but no catastrophic damage. For now. Renwick met them at the ladder, eyes wild, but movements precise. "Aux power is online, ma'am. No visible fuel leaks. We've got one gear door jam indicator, but she's otherwise clean." Another boom rolled across the field, this one accompanied by a column of dust erupting uncomfortably close to the runway midpoint. "Under attack, ROE?" she demanded. "Launch if able," Renwick said, "but command says no taxi through unassessed damage. Engineers haven't cleared the runway yet." Elena stared past him at the torn strip of concrete. Another flight of missiles would come. Even now, somewhere on a hostile coast, launch crews would be reloading. On the radio, fragmented voices overlapped. Tower, ground, someone from base command. "Repeat, any airworthy asset capable of departure, prepare to launch. Runway condition unknown. Damage at 09 threshold, confirmed." Unknown, confirmed. Two words that had no business in the same sentence, and yet here they were. Miller looked at her. "If we wait for an assessment, we'll be here when the next volley arrives. And if we taxi into a crater, we never leave at all. the navigator said. They all turned to her. In their eyes, she saw the same calculation that pulsed in her own blood. Stay and die slow, or move and risk dying fast. Get strapped in, she said. Now. We don't commit to taxi until I talk to Tower and see what's left. But we don't do that from the ground. As she climbed the ladder, another missile slammed into the far side of the base, the shockwave rattling the access steps so violently that for a heartbeat she thought she would fall. She clung on, jaw clenched, then dragged herself into the cockpit. The B-2's systems came alive under her hands, displays flickering, warnings blooming. Outside, the runway burned in sections, smoke drifting across like a torn veil. In her headset, the tower controller's voice fought through static and fear. Nightshade 1, this is Ravenham Tower. If you can move, if you can fly, you launch. We may not have a runway much longer. Elena stared at the damage readouts, at the ghost green outline of the base on her moving map, now overlaid with little red X's where impacts had struck. Half a runway, maybe less. Her hand settled on the throttles, not yet pushing, just feeling their weight. Ravenham Tower, she said, each word steady despite the tremor in her bones. Nightshade 1 copies. We'll see what this bird can do. The B-2 trembled under her hands, not from motion, but from the constant concussion of impacts around Ravenham. In the HUD, the world was a smear of smoke, emergency strobes, and jagged heat blooms. Engine stable, Miller reported, voice clipped. All 4 at military power available? No significant vibration beyond, what the planet is doing. The navigator's voice cut in, tight. Base diagram updated. Impact at 09 threshold, estimated crater length 70 to 80 meters. Debris field extends back another 50. Elena's eyes flicked to the glowing layout on the display. The long gray strip she knew had been scarred. A red blotched zone at the far right. Little hazard symbols blinking. How much usable length before the damage? She asked. From our end? The navigator's fingers danced over his keypad. Approximately 2,100 meters clear. Maybe a bit less. The rest is creative landscaping. 2,100. Her mind began dividing, converting, cross-referencing weight, wind, and performance numbers she knew as well as her own name. Crosswind? She asked. 080 at 20, gusting 28, Miller answered. Quartering from the left. Not ideal. Nothing about this is ideal, the EWO muttered. On the open frequency, Tower's voice pushed through static. Nightshade 1, Nightshade 2, this is Ravenham Tower. Any aircraft capable of movement, taxi for immediate departure. We may not have a second chance. Repeat. If you can go, go now. A blast thudded somewhere beyond the far fence, making the cockpit shiver. A new cloud of dust rose, partially obscuring the damaged end of the strip. Emergency procedures whispered at the back of her skull. Unknown surface condition. Visible structural damage. Unassessed debris. The handbook was clear. Remain in place until engineers reported. Preserve lives. Preserve assets. Do not attempt departure from questionable pavement. But the handbook did not mention sequential salvos designed to finish what the first volley had started. Commands telling everyone to launch? Elena asked. The EWO nodded, headset askew. Higher HQ just flashed. Airborne assets take precedence. If you can be wheels up, do it. That's as close to good luck as we're getting. The bomber was heavy, fuel tanks full enough for a long-range strike, bays packed with ordnance that represented a chunk of NATO's early punch in this conflict. The mass pressed down through the gears into the battered concrete beneath. We could jettison a portion. Miller said quietly. Lighten the load. Buy some margin. No, Elena said, more sharply than she intended. ROE is explicit. No live drops over friendly soil or populated areas. You want to be the first case study in this war's tribunal. He swallowed. No, ma'am. And we don't have time to climb to a safe jettison box, even if we did, the navigator added. They're already retargeting us. Silence settled for a heartbeat, filled only by the hum of systems and the distant, sickening thud of impacts. Images flickered in Elena's memory. The simulator dome, rain streaking across synthetic glass, numbers spinning on a HUD that had felt real enough to taste. Reduced length departure, marginal rotation. A climb so shallow it felt like a prayer stretched out over concrete. She had promised herself she would never use that profile outside a screen. Okay, she said. Her own voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to someone listening from a kilometer away. We calculate. Clean slate, no wishful thinking. She called up the performance page. Gross weight? The navigator read it out. The number sat on the line between doctrine and madness. Elena, Miller said softly, dropping rank for the first time since the attacks began. She ignored the familiarity, focusing on the known variables. 2 100 meters paved, top end compromised. Assume we rotate before the debris field and accept we can't stop once committed. That means our abort point is... She traced it mentally. Effectively 0. Once we push, we either fly or we eat concrete. Manual says we need more field than that, the navigator said. The manual assumes we're allowed to say no, she replied. Another countdown ticked, invisible but relentless. The time between salvos. Their adversary had no reason to stop. A grounded B-2 was a prize. A destroyed one, another kind of victory. Options, she said. Stay here and die when the next volley comes. Taxi somewhere else and die slower. Or use all the book gives us and everything it politely pretends we won't try. The cockpit was very quiet. Major, the EWO said, I'd rather die trying to leave than sitting on a spot waiting to be recorded as destroyed on ground. Miller met her eyes. There was fear there and trust, and something like defiance. Your call, he said. We follow. She felt the weight of that more than any tonnage figure. A lifetime of training had conditioned her to think in terms of procedures, standardization, repeatable outcomes. This decision lived beyond all of that. Her father's gloves creaked faintly as she tightened her grip on the throttles. We use the profile I tested in the sim, she said, the words tasting of metal. We accept rotation a hair below the manual speed, maximize thrust from the first inch, and ride ground effect as far as it will take us. No early abort. If anything feels off before V1, we stay. If it feels off after, we commit and hope the air loves us more than the ground does. Copy, the navigator said. His voice shook once, then steadied. I'll call speed gates and any deviations. No sugarcoating. Miller nodded. I'll fly the numbers with you. No second guessing in the moment. AWO? She asked. He exhaled. If we get airborne, I'll give us the quietest path out of here I can. Until then, I'll just hold on. Outside, sirens wailed anew. A fresh warning came over the net. Additional inbound tracks detected. Nightshade 1, Tower called. If you're going, you need to go now. We have inbound estimated impact in less than 3 minutes. Sections of the runway may be unusable soon. 3 minutes. Enough time to overthink or to act. Elena let the fear wash through her once, a cold tide that reached from her throat to her fingertips. then recede, leaving only a hard, focused calm. "Ravenham Tower," she replied. "Nightshade 1 commencing taxi for immediate departure. Runway 09. We will not be available for further surface assessment." "Copy, Nightshade 1," the controller said, a crack in his tone. "Godspeed." She released the brakes. The bomber began to roll, heavy and reluctant on the scarred apron. Every bump telegraphed itself up through the frame, a reminder of how fragile their path was. At the hold line, she paused just long enough for a final glance at the performance page. Numbers wouldn't change now, only what she did with them. "My jet," she said. "Our lives," Miller answered. She advanced the throttles all the way to military power, no hesitation this time. Engines roared, pushing them down the wounded strip toward the jagged destruction at the far end, while somewhere beyond the clouds, another flight of missiles arced silently toward Ravenham. The runway lights were ghosts in smoke. As Nightshade 1 rolled onto centerline, the far end of Ravenham's strip was a hazy smear, orange fire, black crater, white dust still hanging in the air like the residue of shattered stone. The HUD drew a thin, unwavering line down the middle of it all, indifferent to chaos. "Brakes released," Miller called. "Spool looks good." Elena's hand pushed the throttles through the last millimeters to full military power. The engines answered with a roar that filled the cockpit, vibrations thrumming through the seat into her spine. The B-2 hesitated for a breath, then began to surge forward, heavy mass gathering speed. "Power set," she said. "Cross-check." "4 good," Miller confirmed. "No asymmetry." The centerline rushed toward them, lights flicking by beneath the nose, half obscured by blowing dust. The smell inside the cockpit was filtered, artificial ozone and electronics. But underneath it, she imagined the real sense outside. Burning JP8, hot concrete, pulverized asphalt. 80 knots, the navigator announced. His voice sounded oddly detached, as if coming from another room. The crosswind hit them like a steady palm against the left wing, pushing. Elena eased in rudder and a whisper of aileron, keeping the nose stitched to the runway lights. The bomber responded sluggishly, but, predictably, a huge animal reluctantly obeying its rider. 90, 100, 110. The crater drew closer, its edges becoming distinct. The damage zone shimmered with heat and smoke, an ugly mouth waiting to swallow the last 100 meters of intact concrete. She could feel the old training in her muscles. Wait for the number, obey the book. Do not improvise with 150 tons of airplane. Her father's gloves creaked around the yoke. In her mind, the simulator screen flickered. Reduced runway, rain streaks, the sickening float of a jet refusing to climb. 120, the navigator called. "Wind gusting 28. Correction, 30. A fresh blast slammed into the far side of the base, off to their right. The shockwave washed across the field a beat later, a heavy, invisible hand that rattled the landing gear. The B-2 lurched slightly sideways. The tires bit back, protesting. "Stay with it," Miller grunted, shoulder-braced. The speed tape crept upward. Calculated rotation speed glowed on the HUD like a dare. "Approaching V1, the navigator said. Commit point in 3, 2, 1, V1. No more aborts. Beyond this, there was only flight or wreckage. The crater raced toward them now, close enough that she could pick out fractured slabs of runway, twisted rebar pointing at the sky. Heat shimmer blurred the transition between usable concrete and chaos. "Rotate speed in 5, the navigator shouted. 4. She didn't wait. At a hair below the number, Elena eased back on the yoke, Not a yank, she didn't dare, but a firm, deliberate pull that asked more than the numbers endorsed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the nose began to lighten, the weight on the gear slipping. The angle of attack indicator climbed toward the red band, needles trembling. "Watch AOA," Miller warned, but his hands moved with hers, not against. The main gear still hammered along the runway, every seam a jolt. The air felt thick and uncooperative, drag clinging to the wing like mud. Ground effect hovered just ahead, a narrow cushion of disturbed air. "Come on," she whispered through clenched teeth, as if the bomber could hear her. The nose wheel lifted. The world tipped, slightly, the horizon tilting as the cockpit rose a few precious degrees. The main gear still rolled, but the load shifted, the aircraft beginning to skim rather than plow. She could feel the drag easing, the wing starting to bite. "Positive trend," the navigator said, half disbelief, half hope. "Sink rate, just above 0. They were still earthbound in all the ways that mattered. The crater's near edge rushed up, close enough now that she could see individual hunks of broken concrete. "Gear still on," Miller muttered. "We're dragging our toes through hell." She pulled another fraction of a degree, watching the AOA needle kiss the margin. Any more and the wing would stall dirty, dumping them back onto the runway, or worse, onto the crater lip. For a sickening instant, the B-2 seemed to hang between worlds. The main gear bumped once, twice, each impact a bone-deep crash. Warning chimes chimed a split-second symphony as sensors misread the half-flying state. Then the bumps stopped. They were in full ground effect now, the wing riding a narrow cushion of compressed air just above the runway surface. The altimeter barely twitched, but the subtle change in feel told her they'd broken free of the concrete's grip. "Main gear off," Miller said, voice tight. "We're skimming." "Do not climb yet," she said. "We milk this cushion for speed." The crater swept beneath them, a jagged mouth opening under the bomber's belly. The HUD's runway depiction ended abruptly, replaced by a smear of heat and rubble. A missile hit somewhere behind them at the same instant. The blast lit the cockpit with a brief, hellish glare. The shock wave caught them from the rear, shoving the tail upward, pitching the nose down. The aircraft bucked, alarms shrieking in protest. "Turbulence! No, that's a blast wave!" the navigator shouted. "Watch your pitch!" Elena fought the impulse to yank. She held the yoke in a white-knuckled grip, easing it back just enough to counter the nose drop, riding out the ugly shudder that ran from tail to nose. The AOA needle flirted with the red, dipped, returned to the ragged edge. A sharp thump reverberated through the airframe, followed by a new light on the annunciator panel. "Right main tire. Pressure loss," Miller snapped. "We took shrapnel. Gear's still locked, but that wheel's not happy." "We're not landing yet," she said. "Let it complain." The end of the crater fell away beneath them. Ahead, the remainder of the runway flickered past, then the overrun, then grass and perimeter fencing. They were still only a handful of meters above the ground, barely clear. "Speed plus 10, the navigator said, voice rising. "We've got enough to start a real climb." Elena exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath for far too long. "Gear up," she ordered. "Ma'am, with that tire? If it's going to fail, it'll fail in the well or in the air. We're not going back to inspect it." Her tone brooked no argument. Miller hit the lever. The B-2 shuddered again as the gear retracted, the wounded tire dragging briefly before disappearing. For a moment she imagined it tearing loose, bouncing down the wrecked runway behind them like a piece of discarded fate. Pitch. Power. She fed in a few more degrees, feeling the aircraft respond, climb rate ticking slowly, then more firmly, into the positive. The ground began to fall away in a way that felt real this time, not like a magician's trick. "Passing 50 feet, the navigator said. 100, 200. Climb is solid. We're actually doing this." Outside, Ravenham shrank, covered in smoke and fire and new craters blooming along its length. The long, straight line of the runway that had always looked so assured was now a broken scar. Inside the cockpit, warning lights still glowed. Tire pressure, minor structural alerts, one fuel imbalance indicator flickering. "Sort the disco lights," Elena said hoarsely. "We're not dead yet. Let's not get creative now." Miller let out a rough laugh that sounded half like a sob. The EWO wiped a hand across his face, leaving a smear of sweat on his visor. "Nightshade 1, a strained voice came over the radio. "Tower, or what was left of it. We show you airborne. Say status." Elena looked down at the wounded base, at the strip they had clawed away from by centimeters. "Ravenham Tower," she replied, breathing finally settling into a rhythm that didn't hurt. "Nightshade 1 is airborne, climbing, multiple minor system warnings. Gear up. We're still here." For the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself one thought that was not calculation. Unthinkable, she thought. And then, now what? Once Ravenham fell behind them, the sky went strangely quiet. At 3,000 feet, the cockpit no longer shook with every impact. The smoke rising from the base smeared into a dark bruise along the horizon, the fractured runway just another line lost in the haze. The warning chimes inside the B-2, however, refused to let anyone pretend this was a clean escape. "Tire pressure warning acknowledged," Miller said, fingers dancing over the panel. "Right main wheel flagged as failed. Gear is up and locked. No further anomalies from the bay." "Fuel?" Elena asked. The navigator's mouth was a thin line. "We've got a minor imbalance. Right wing tank took some shrapnel, slow leak. It's manageable if we keep an eye on it. Structural monitors show localized stress at the wing root, but within limits." The EWO flicked through screens, frown deepening. "Some of our antennas didn't enjoy that last blast. We've lost one SATCOM channel and a backup data link. Primary low probability of intercept link is still alive, but it's finicky." Elena listened to the litany as if it were weather. Conditions to be worked with, not complaints. The relief of simply being airborne was already giving way to the harder question. To where? On the main display, the planned strike route still glowed. A thin curve arcing from Ravenham toward the adversary's airspace, then deeper, toward pre-briefed targets whose coordinates her crew knew by heart. That route assumed a base that still functioned, tankers where they were supposed to be, a sky not yet swarming with panicked friendlies and hunting hostiles. "Command?" she asked. "Stand by," the EWO said. "They're busy not losing their minds." Static hissed. Fragments of other calls bled through. Fighters checking in, tankers diverting, someone declaring an emergency fuel state. In the chaos, the calm, computerized squawk of the mission data link seemed obscene. "Nightshade 1, this is Falcon Actual," a new voice cut in, clear and authoritative. Haze. "Say status." Elena's chest eased a fraction. "Falcon Actual, Nightshade 1 is airborne, multiple minor system hits, structure stable, partial comm degradation. We are clear of Ravenham. Be advised, runway condition is non-existent." "I can see that," Hayes replied. There was a tightness beneath his controlled tone. We're overhead in an AWACS slot. Ravenham is combat ineffective for the foreseeable future. He let that hang a second, then asked, "Weapon state?" "All loads present and accounted for," the navigator answered before Elena could. "No release, no damage indicators in the bays." "Copy," Hayes said. "Hire is debating whether to retask or bring you home. Stand by for guidance." The idea of home as Ravenham felt darkly ironic. Elena glanced back toward the burning smear on the horizon. Even if they turned now, where would they land? The damaged tire, the wounded wing, the cratered runway? Every option came with a different flavor of risk. Miller must have read her thoughts. "Divert to mainland Europe?" he suggested quietly. "Or farther north. Somewhere the planners haven't had time to argue over." "We're a B-2, not a C-130, the EWO reminded him. "You can't just drop us anywhere and hope the locals have hangars tall enough and guards discreet enough." Elena's fingers rested lightly on the yoke, the habit of control even as they cruised straight and steady. The bomber's nose pointed toward a future that had forked into 3 unknown paths: abort, divert, or press. "Nightshade 1, Hayes's voice returned, slightly more strained. "Falcon Actual, here is the situation. The first wave of strikes from other assets was disrupted by the same salvo that hit you. Some aircraft never made it off their ramps. Others are scattered. Our early suppression plan is shaky. Shaky, a polite word for barely hanging on. You're one of the few stealth assets airborne and armed in the right hemisphere," he continued. "Hire wants options. You are one of them." "ROE?" Elena asked. "Unchanged," Hayes said. "No weapons release without authenticated codes. But we can place you on a pre-strike orbit while command decides whether to send the go. Or we can order you to divert now and preserve the asset." Preserve the asset. She heard what he didn't say. Preserve the jet, the program, the classified systems, by not risking them over hostile territory when their air picture was suddenly far more uncertain. "And the war?" she asked, before she could stop herself. A brief silence filled with the soft hiss of the radios. "The opening hours are fluid," Hayes said. "Some of the enemy's systems are still smoking from our first blows. Others are intact and angry. Your target set remains high priority. Hitting it now could change what tomorrow looks like. Or it could be a suicide run if we misjudge their readiness." The navigator murmured, "Fuel-wise, we can reach the initial attack ingress, execute, and still have options to divert afterward. The leak is slow. It doesn't kill the mission. It just shortens our leash." The EWO added, "Our LO profile is intact enough. We can go in low observable, high subsonic, hugging the margins. But if they get a lucky track, our damaged antenna picture will not help us." The cockpit seemed to shrink around Elena. For a moment she was back at the kitchen table in Bratislava, her father's voice calling her aircraft a coward's weapon. From here, hurtling above a wounded base with a wounded jet, there was nothing cowardly about choosing to turn toward the fight. Her dilemma crystallized. Be the officer who preserved a national asset by refusing a mission that might have mattered, or be the one who risked her crew and jet on a strike that command might later decide was unnecessary or mistimed. "Nightshade 1, Hayes said softly, as if speaking to her alone. "Here's what I can offer. We set a window. If authenticated target codes reach you before you hit a defined commit point on the route, you press in. If not, you divert. No half measures. No loitering and indecision while the sky closes on you." It was a compromise between paralysis and recklessness. It also dumped the moral weight right back into her lap. "Your call, Major," Hayes added. "I'll support it either way, and I will say so on the record. But you know what our job is supposed to be." Beside her, Miller's gloved hand rested on his thigh, fingers twitching once, then going still. The navigator stared at his screens. The EWO watched her, not pretending indifference. Elena thought of the airman she'd left propped against a doorway, leg bleeding, of Renwick's cautious approval, of Izzy's quiet warning. You just wrote your own future. Copy Falcon Actual, she said, feeling the decision settle into her chest like a new kind of gravity. Set the window. If we have codes by the commit point, we go in. If not, we divert to the best option that isn't on fire. Understood, Hayes replied. She could hear the exhale he didn't quite let become a sigh. Transmit your current fuel and system state. I'll have my people run the numbers on diversions. Stand by for commit coordinates. As they worked the details, timings, altitudes, contingencies, Elena nudged the B-2 onto a new heading, one that pointed not home, but toward a long, dark stretch of sea, and beyond it, the hostile coastline. The jet felt heavy but compliant, as if relieved to have a purpose again beyond mere survival. The time to the commit point appeared on her HUD. 19 minutes. It might as well have been 19 years. Minutes stretched. The sky outside was a pale, hazed blue, empty to the naked eye. Inside, the cockpit busied itself with subtle alarms and checklists. They trimmed the aircraft to compensate for the fuel leak. They re-ran key system checks. The EWO tuned his electronic ears to the faintest whiff of hostile emissions. 15 minutes to commit, the navigator intoned. No new tasking yet. Miller cleared his throat. If they don't send the codes, and we divert north, we're probably bedding down in a place that's never seen a B-2 up close. That's going to be a circus. Better a circus than a funeral, the EWO said. Elena said nothing. She watched the countdown, trying not to imagine the rooms where officers and politicians argued over maps, arrows, and acceptable loss ratios. 10 minutes, the navigator said. Silence. In that silence, doubt crept in. Maybe the truly responsible choice was to refuse to be drawn into their hesitation, to say, no codes now, no mission later, to take her wounded crew and aircraft somewhere safer and let others carry the load. But the memory of Ravenham's broken concrete hovered just below the edge of her vision. They had already paid a price. The idea of leaving the weapon she carried unused, turning back while the enemy's systems recalibrated after the opening blows, felt like wasting that cost. 5 minutes, came the next call. Still no authenticated traffic. Nightshade 1, Hayes chimed in. We're pressing them. Decisions tied up in collateral review on one of the target sets. You know how this goes. I do, she said tightly. Politicians measuring kilometers and blast radii while crews measured seconds and fuel. 3 minutes, the navigator said. If we don't have codes by 1 minute, we need to initiate the divert profile. Elena's throat felt dry. Understood. The ocean stretched below, dark and indifferent. Ahead, the hostile coastline crouched like a shadow on the horizon, its radar dishes and missile batteries either blind and burning, or waiting. 1 minute 30, the navigator said. No, wait. Data link activity. Something's coming in. The EWO leaned forward, tension coiling. Lines of text began to crawl across his screen, encrypted, then decrypting in hard angles of letters and numbers. We have traffic, he said. Authentication sequence incoming. Stand by. Elena's heart beat in time with the blinking cursor. Either this was the go, or it wasn't. Either her earlier decision to rotate early, to claw them into the air, had been a prologue to something meaningful, or it would remain a desperate act followed by cautious retreat. Nightshade 1. Hayes's voice came, more urgent now. This is Falcon Actual. Hire authorizes continuation of mission per updated. Target package. Authenticate code series. He read off a string of letters and numbers. The navigator checked them against the mission key, lips moving silently. The seconds bled away. Codes confirm, the navigator said. This is real, Major. Updated target data loaded, the EWO added. We have revised aim points, same general area, slightly adjusted to respect new no-strike grids. ROE unchanged. Your judgment still required at release. The commit point ticked closer, then passed. No longer a fork, but a line they had crossed. Elena felt the bomber settle around her decision, the way a living thing settles around a choice to run or fight. Falcon Actual, she transmitted, voice steady. Nightshade 1 acknowledges authenticated tasking. We are committing to strike. She banked the B-2 toward enemy airspace, nose tilting toward a darkness that was no longer just smoke behind them, but an entire contested future ahead. The wounded wing held. The damaged systems stayed quiet for now. Okay, she said to her crew, more to anchor herself than anything else. We survived takeoff. Now we see what we can do with that. Nightshade 1 rode a lane of darkness. At altitude, the world beneath them was a patchwork of colder blacks and softer grays, the land barely distinguishable from sea. The B-2's skin swallowed what little starlight filtered through the high overcast, rendering the bomber almost as invisible to the human eye as to the radars they were slipping past. Threat emitters quiet, the EWO murmured. Either we scared them, or we killed them, or they're still rebooting after the first wave, or they're smarter than we think. Let's assume the third, Elena said. Less disappointing if we're wrong. On the navigation display, the ingress route traced a sinuous path around known radar fields and suspected SAM sites. The updated target package glowed at the far end. 2 primary aim points, 1 secondary, each a tiny symbol carrying more consequence than their pixels suggested. The navigator zoomed in. Primary Alpha, integrated air defense node, hardened shelters, control bunkers. Primary Bravo, command and control facility adjacent to a rail junction. Secondary, a radar site on the ridge east of the city. The word hung there. City. Elena's gaze sharpened. Population density? High, he said. Urban sprawl to the south. According to the updated coordinates, our aim point for Bravo is on the northern edge of the complex. Still close. ROE text scrolled in the corner of her mind. Minimize collateral damage. Maintain confidence in target discrimination. Pilot retains responsibility to withhold if doubt is significant. She felt a slight chill that had nothing to do with cockpit temperature. Bring up the overlays. The navigator complied. Satellite imagery bloomed on his screen, contour lines and infrared signatures layered over the map. Even at this resolution, Elena could make out the rough layout. Blocky buildings clustered near the rail lines. Roads radiating toward denser neighborhoods that glowed faintly with civilian heat. Izzy's voice whispered from memory. That district is a political tinderbox. Hit it wrong, and you don't just make enemies, you make martyrs. Miller leaned closer to his display. Aim point is here. He tapped the bunker icon near the junction. CEP on our weapons at this altitude and profile is small. We put steel where we tell it. Assuming no guidance issues, no last-second errors, no wind shifts we didn't see, Elena said. The EWO glanced back at her. ROE doesn't ask you to be a meteorologist and a priest. It asks you to be reasonably sure. Reasonable. It was a word that sounded sterile in a cockpit hurtling toward coordinates, where people, unaware, were finishing late shifts, putting children to bed, checking their phones. She drew a slow breath. What terrain features do we have around Bravo? The navigator zoomed again. Rail lines to the west, industrial warehouses to the north, river to the east. You can just see the curve. Residential blocks mostly to the south and southwest. Our current aim point is near the southern outer wall of the C2 complex. Maximum damage to their comms. Maximum risk of overshoot into civilian blocks if something goes sideways. Can we shift the aim point 10-20 meters to the north? She asked. Still inside the complex footprint, leaning toward the warehouses. Miller frowned. We'd lose some punch against the core bunker. Not all of it, the navigator said slowly. With our CEP, a north shift keeps us within destructive range of the key nodes. It just biases the blast away from the densest housing. The package we received is pre-authorized, the EWO reminded them. If we start tweaking aim points in the middle of a live run, ROE says I must be comfortable with where my weapons land. Elena cut in. If Hire wanted total deniability, they would have flown drones. They sent us. For a moment, only the quiet hiss of airflow and the muted hum of electronics filled the cockpit. The decision lived there, between the image of anonymous apartments and the cold promise of degraded enemy communications. Time to Alpha release. 4 minutes, the navigator said. Bravo comes 90 seconds after. Elena felt the weight of the clock pressing against her ribs. We keep Alpha as briefed. No civilian density issues there. Agreed, the EWO said. On Bravo, she went on, we shift aim point 15 meters north-northwest, inside their fence line, still within effective radius for the bunker. Document the change in the mission log. If anyone has a problem with it, they can call me to the next inquiry. Understood, the navigator said quietly. Updating aim point. Now. Tiny numbers adjusted on his screen, a set of coordinates moving by fractions of degrees. Somewhere far below, the difference meant shockwaves rippling down different streets. Nightshade 1. Hayes's voice crackled through, slightly degraded by distance and damaged antennas. Falcon Actual. You are approaching the release window. Confirm you are weapons hot and within ROE. Elena keyed her mic. Falcon Actual, Nightshade 1, weapons hot, ROE acknowledged. Minor aim point adjustment on Bravo within target complex to reduce potential collateral. Details to follow post-mission. A brief pause. She imagined Hayes in his airborne command post, glancing at his own advisors. Copy, Nightshade 1, he said. Your judgment. Make it count. Alpha in 2 minutes, the navigator announced. Switching to attack profile. Descending to release altitude. The B-2 dipped, nose angling slightly down, engines subtly adjusting. Outside, the darkness deepened as they slid under some of the higher-level surveillance envelopes, trading altitude for invisibility. Elena's world narrowed to crosshairs and numbers. For Alpha, there was no moral geometry to argue with, only the cold logic of silencing a system designed to kill her comrades. Alpha target acquired, Miller said. Stable lock. No unexpected returns. Release in 3, 2, 1, pickle, the navigator counted. There was a muted thunk as the first pair of weapons fell away, swallowed by the night. The bomber lightened by a fraction, too subtle to feel but registered in the instruments. They banked, following the attack run toward Bravo. Below, faint glows marked roads and factories, a ghostly city unaware of the steel descending through its airspace. Bravo target on scope, the navigator said. Aim point updated. Guidance solution within parameters. CEP nominal. Elena's hand hovered near the stick, ready for any last-second adjustments that survival demanded, but morality no longer could. "You still comfortable?" Miller asked, not quite rhetorical. "No," she said. "But I'm as sure as I'm going to get. Release in 3, 2, 1. Commit," she said. The second set of weapons dropped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence and the ticking of their own systems. Then, on the horizon behind them, twin blooms of light flickered, first Alpha, then Bravo. The flashes were small from this distance, muffled by clouds and curvature, but the sensors read the signatures: impact, detonation, secondary fires. "Good hits," the navigator said softly. "Both aim points within expected error. Post-strike imagery will confirm." Elena did not look back. Her eyes stayed on the path ahead, toward egress routes and unknown threats. In her chest, something heavy settled deeper rather than lifting. The bomber had done what it was built to do. So had she. "Mission clock's over," the EWO murmured. "From here on, it's all return and survive." War, she thought, did not begin with takeoff, or even with the first explosion on a runway. It began the moment you accepted that sometimes the best you could do was move destruction a few meters farther from someone's home. "Turn us toward the nearest sky that isn't trying to kill us," she said. "Then we figure out where, if anywhere, we're allowed to land." The B-2 banked gently westward, leaving the burning horizon behind. Nightshade 1 was lighter now, ordnance gone, fuel burning steadily, but still wounded. The right wing groaned faintly in certain turns, a quiet metallic complaint that no one in the cockpit dared mention unless it changed tone. "Fuel state updated," the navigator said, scrolling through revised projections. "Leak is stable but not slowing. We've got enough to reach any divert inside this ring." He tapped the map. But the ring shrinks every 15 minutes. Elena studied the display. Several bases glowed green on the digital map, others amber, more red. Labels flickered as data updated. Runway damage reported. Fire on apron. No shelter for low assets. Unknown. Hayes cut in over the link, his voice strained but steady. "Nightshade 1, Falcon Actual. What's your current landing recommendation?" She grimaced. "None that I love. Give me your picture." "Copy, here it is." There was a rustle of papers or gloves against a console. Base A, structurally intact, but overwhelmed with damaged fighters and tankers. No secure hangar for you. Political red lines if you land there without invitation. Might take them hours to clear streets and media. Base B, security adequate, but one runway possibly cratered. Workers are still assessing in blackout. Base C, pristine runway, perfect length, high security, but farther, considerably farther. "Fuel farther?" Miller asked, brow lifting. "Farther," Hayes confirmed. "Your leak rate buys you the trip if nothing worsens. If it does, you swim." The EWO let out a low whistle. "We're a stealth bomber, not a speedboat." Elena felt the crew's tension refract through the cockpit. "Any other options?" "One," Hayes said reluctantly. "A classified site on friendly soil. Shorter runway, but doable with your current weight. However, it's never hosted a B-2. Logistics, fuel, security, all question marks. And landing a LO asset in a place not fully prepared is a nightmare for every intel officer I have." "So Base C is the only one that ticks every box except distance," Elena said. "Correct." She drummed her gloved fingers lightly on the yoke. Each option carried a different kind of danger. Political exposure, runway failure, fuel starvation, security risk. She had to choose which risk she could live with, literally and morally. "What about the tire?" she asked. "Landing on a blown main on a questionable strip is suicide." "Engineering concurs," Hayes said. "If you attempt base B and the runway turns out compromised, that tire will turn a hard landing into a cartwheel. Base C gives you length and smooth surface. You'll still feel the asymmetry, but you can ride it." Miller glanced at her. "Ma'am, if we go to C, we're on fumes if anything delays final approach. And if we go anywhere else," the navigator added, "we might not walk away." The EWO rolled his shoulders, a nervous tick he tried to hide. "We've already survived impossible once today. Maybe we don't tempt fate twice." Elena closed her eyes for a breath, letting the cabin hum settle around her. Flying was a series of decisions. Some shaped a mission, some shaped a career. A few etched themselves into bone and never let go. "We go to Base C," she said. No one argued. "Falcon Actual, Nightshade 1 committing to divert Charlie. Send us updated air picture and approach vectors." "Copy, Nightshade 1. Hayes sounded relieved. Almost. "We're clearing the corridor. Be advised, weather around Charlie is degrading. Not storm level, but enough to make final approach interesting." "Understood," she said. "We don't do boring anymore." As they turned onto the long arc toward safety, the B-2 shuddered. Just once. A deep tremor like a giant exhaling through cracked ribs. All three crew members looked up sharply. "Telemetry spike on the wing route," the navigator said. "Back within limits now." "Keep watching it," Elena ordered. They flew on. Minutes stretched into cautious quiet as the bomber carved its path across the dark. Ground radars stayed silent. No hostile intercept vectors appeared, yet the cockpit felt no safer, merely suspended. "Fuel check," she said. "Projected landing with—" The navigator hesitated. "A margin I will not name out loud." The EWO was pale beneath his visor. "Any chance we can save fuel by climbing?" "No," Elena said. "We climb, we stress the wing. We dive, we speed up the leak. We stay right here and make friends with this cursed altitude." Miller chuckled weakly. "Copy that." The first faint contours of weather began to shimmer on the scope. Green clusters blooming like algae, not violent but persistent. Turbulence, updrafts, unpredictable shears. "Approaching Charlie's airspace in 3 minutes," the navigator announced. Elena straightened in her seat. "EWO, get their tower on our remaining clean channel. Miller, prep for asymmetric landing. Navigator, I want wind at surface, gust pattern, runway condition, everything." The EWO tuned in. Static washed through, then a clipped, startled voice. "Unidentified inbound stealth aircraft. This is Charlie Tower. State call sign and intentions." The EWO gave a small grin. "They weren't expecting us." "Charlie Tower, this is Nightshade 1, NATO bomber, emergent divert. We are damaged, low fuel, and require immediate landing clearance. Authentication package transmitting now." The response took only seconds. "Nightshade 1, authentication received. Landing runway 27. Be advised, crosswind 15, gusting 22. Weather cell moving in from the north. Approach lights operational. Fire crews standing by." "Roger, Charlie Tower," Elena said. "We're coming to you on 1.5 wings and 1.5 tires. Clear the pattern." "Acknowledged, Nightshade 1. Pattern is yours." As they descended, the turbulence hit, soft at first, then jolting. The cockpit rattled. The wounded wing protested with a hollow metallic groan. "Structural strain increasing," the navigator said. "Still within yellow." "Keep it there," Elena said. Lightning flickered inside distant clouds. Wind buffeted them sideways. Warning lights blinked erratically as airflow over damaged surfaces fluctuated. "Runway in sight," Miller said. "Crosswind holding. This is doable." "Doable isn't comforting," the EWO muttered. Elena eased the nose down, feeling the air thicken as the bomber sank into lower altitudes. Each movement had to be gentle. Tiny corrections, tiny angles. Anything abrupt could hammer the wing root into red. "Final checks," she said. Her voice carried the calm she did not feel. "Gear down." Miller hesitated. "With that tire, we need the stability," she said. He lowered the gear. The wounded wheel extended with an ugly shudder. The B-2 yawed slightly to the right. "Compensating," Elena said, nudging rudder and aileron. Runway lights stretched out like a trembling ladder in the misty darkness. "Wind shear warning," the navigator said. "Short and sharp. 500 meters ahead." "Copy." The B-2 descended, heavy and wounded, as the weather thickened. Just as they crossed the outer marker, the sky bucked, hard. The bomber dropped, rolled a fraction, alarms shrieking. The damaged wing flexed, telemetry spiking bright red. "Wing root overload," the navigator shouted. "Structural alert." Elena fought the controls, altitude melting away. They were seconds from the ground, seconds from either landing or breaking apart in the dark. The B-2 did not fall apart. For one stretched, endless second on final, it seemed determined to. Wind shear punched up under the damaged wing. The bomber dropped and rolled, alarms screamed, and every instinct in Elena's body begged her to haul back, to overcorrect, to fight. She didn't. Years of training and one day of surviving the impossible held her hands steady. She bled in a fraction of power, nudged counter-rudder, let the air wash through the wing instead of wrestling it. The sink rate eased from catastrophic to brutal, then to merely hard. They hit the runway like a hammer on an anvil. The blown tire burst completely, shredding. The B-2 lurched violently to the right, nose slewing. Elena rode the skid, feeding in opposite rudder, spoilers, every tool she had to keep 60 meters of stealth wing from becoming a plow. The bomber shuddered, howled, and then finally dragged itself straight. They rolled to a stop amid the wail of sirens and the flash of emergency lights. For a moment, no one spoke. "We're down," Miller whispered, as if afraid to break the spell. We're down." Only then did Elena realize her fingers were locked around the yoke so tightly that her knuckles hurt. She forced them open one by one. Her heart hammered, but beneath the adrenaline was something stranger. A hollow, exhausted quiet. The inquiries began 3 days later. They were thorough. In a windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and paper, panels of officers and civilians walked through every decision she had made that day. They displayed flight data on large screens. Takeoff roll, rotation speed, angle of attack curves that dipped into red like a heartbeat, flirting with arrest. They replayed tower recordings, ground radar traces, footage captured by a security camera that had, by some miracle, survived the first salvo. "Major Markova," one senior officer said, peering at her over reading glasses. "You rotated below prescribed speed for your aircraft's weight and runway condition. Are you aware that if you had suffered even a small engine performance degradation, the outcome would likely have been fatal?" "Yes, sir," she said. "So why do it?" Because the warheads weren't going to wait. Because the manual had not been written for a runway already dying beneath her. Because some days survival required offending the book. Because staying meant certain destruction of the aircraft and its payload, she replied. Committing to the takeoff gave us a chance, however marginal. I judged that chance preferable to zero. Another panelist, a civilian in a discreet suit, steepled his fingers. Some would say you gambled with a strategic asset worth billions. She met his gaze. I did, but I also prevented that asset from being destroyed on the ground, and we executed our target package. If my judgment was flawed, I expect you to tell me so. But I would make the same choice again under the same conditions. They examined her moral decisions, too. Izzy's notes had found their way into the record. The aim point shift on Bravo was discussed with cool, almost clinical interest. You accepted reduced effectiveness against the command bunker, an intelligence colonel said, to reduce the risk to nearby civilians. Yes. Do you believe that was your role, Major? To adjust strategic effect from the cockpit? RO paragraphs flickered in her memory. RO places ultimate responsibility for release with the pilot in command, she said. If I cannot live with the likely consequences of where my weapons land, I should not drop them. Can you live with them? Someone asked quietly. She hesitated then, not because she didn't know, but because the honest answer was complicated. I am learning to, she said. They did not ground her. The official findings spoke of extraordinary circumstances and sound airmanship in extremis, wrapped around a warning that her takeoff technique was not to be considered precedent for ordinary operations. A footnote in the revised ROE guidance described Markova-type departures as last resort measures, requiring both physical desperation and moral acceptance of risk. She read that line 3 times, feeling as if her name had been carved into a rulebook that would outlive her. Hayes met her afterward in his office, the air thick with the smell of overused coffee and understatement. You're cleared to fly, Major, he said, medically and administratively. And politically? She asked. He smiled without humor. Politically, you're a problem. Some want to put you on a podium as the woman who saved the spirit. Others want you in a staff job where you can't ever make them nervous again. What do you want? She asked. He studied her. I want you where your judgment does the most good and the least harm. You still want the cockpit? She thought of waking at night to the memory of the crater's edge, of the airman's blood on her gloves, of the quiet flare on the horizon where Bravo had burned. Yes, she said. But not just for me. I want to teach. Not just procedures, judgment. Where the book ends and the person begins. Hayes leaned back. You're volunteering to become the cautionary tale and the instructor at the same time. If they're going to use my name in footnotes, she said, I'd rather be in the room when the next pilot reads them. He huffed something that might have been a laugh. Done. You'll fly and you'll teach. Don't make me regret giving you both. The message from her father arrived a week later. No greeting, just a single line on her secure account, translated awkwardly by the system but clear enough. You flew like a fool, and like my daughter. She stared at it for a long time, then closed her eyes and let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in her chest since Bratislava. Izzy visited her that same day, dropping into a chair in the squadron lounge without ceremony. I used your case, Izzy said, sipping tea, in the last ROE workshop, to argue that pretending pilots are machines breeds bad decisions. I think some of them heard me. Any miracles? Elena asked. No, Izzy said, but fewer lies. It's a start. Months later, Ravenham's runway lay smooth and straight again, new concrete bright against the older sections. The scars had been paved over, but not erased. At dawn, Elena stood at its edge, flight suit zipped halfway, the morning air cold on her face. The B-2 on the ramp behind her gleamed in the pale light. Silent, waiting. She watched a small bird hop along the painted center line, indifferent to the history beneath its feet. Somewhere inside the base, alarms sat silent. For now. Somewhere beyond the horizon, radars rotated, men and women drew up plans, and the next crisis rehearsed itself in quiet hearts. Her hands were steady. The weight she carried had not diminished. It had simply become familiar. When the first rays of sun slid over the threshold, turning the runway into a path of muted gold, she turned back toward the bomber, boots striking the concrete that had once tried to kill her. There would be other missions, other choices that offered no clean answers. The next unthinkable decision, she knew, was already out there, waiting for someone to walk toward it. She tightened her father's gloves and kept walking,